Hello and welcome to yet another conversation here at News9 Plus at the Raisina Dialogue 2023. Ever since the conclusion of the G20 Foreign Affairs Ministers meeting here in New Delhi, Raisina Dialogue has been the melting pot of ideas and conversations of global leaders from all across the globe, both track 1 as well as track 2. And here we have yet another personality joining us all the way from Saudi Arabia. We have Salman Al-Ansari, who is one of the most influential political commentators from the Middle East. Thank you so much, Salman.
Thank you so much, Aditya.
Well, I want to begin by asking you about the Raisina Dialogue. You are here, and there are countless people from different governments in the world, including the Russian and the American foreign minister, who spoke at length, not just at the G20 but at the Raisina as well. And of course, even though there is no consensus, they have been broadly trying to get some kind of a consensus. And New Delhi has been playing a pivotal role in this entire exercise. How do you see India's foreign policy shaping in these years under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi?
Amazing. Thank you so much, Aditya. It's my first time in New Delhi. I arrived 2 days ago, and I would love to say to the Indian people that I'm seriously very impressed by the amazing hospitality and the generosity of the Indian people. It is actually not strange for them being the founders of one of the biggest and earliest civilizations in history. So we cannot imagine the world and its contributions and science and mathematics and astronomy without linking almost everything to the Indus Valley civilization. So I applaud the Indians for their amazing culture and civilization. When it comes to this dialogue, it is very important dialogue, and it's a global one. And I congratulate Raisina and the ORF for their amazing work. And we've seen comments from all walks of life, from leaders of, for example, from Russia, from the US, etc., and also from India. And I actually found it interesting how the Indian policy making process has been shifting from being somehow passive in the past, having a very active role, in being like an equalizer instead of having to take sides. And the Foreign Affairs Minister or the External Affairs Minister, Jay Shaknar, he said something interesting. He said when he has been asked about taking sides, etc., with regards to the conflict of Ukraine and Russia, he said some nations think that they are the center of the world. But we, as India, we think of ourselves as the center of the world. And we really applauded this. And I think most of the audience there were actually clapping for that. Why? Because at the end of the day, nations need to be respected for their sovereignty. And the Indian policy making process right now is not like in the past. Not at all whatsoever, and we can tell. And it's the same goes with my government, with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I'm a political analyst, an independent one, and I can see that there are a lot of kind of momentum in the way we deal with global affairs and regional affairs. So for example, Prime Minister Modi has been focusing a lot on the domestic affairs, and he has been focusing a lot and putting a lot of emphasis on how to better the lives of the people through the digital transformation plans, through the Aadhaar kind of card, and all these kind of ways to ease the lives of the people. And we see that with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, where Saudi Arabia has been proud to become the top among the G20 nations in the Digital Competitiveness Index. So, and also when it comes to governance, combating corruption. So we see these things. And also with the idea of one of the first projects of Prime Minister Modi was to have Swachh Bharat, like clean India, and how he was actually not only speaking of hygiene India, but also speaking of regulating and working on the governance of every tiny detail in a nation that has the highest population in the world, 1.4 billion. So we are speaking of quarter of the world's population. So it is kind of like impossible. I can't imagine being in a position where I actually manage 1.4 billion. So it's like the size of the world's population 100 years ago or 200 years ago. So beside these things, I've seen that with regards to being an equalizer, the Indian country has something special that nobody has. In addition to the fact that they are the fifth biggest economy in the world, they also play a major role in being an equalizer in the sense that they have the Western values when it comes to the political system, which is democracy, and they also have the Eastern values, which they have actually founded with the other Eastern communities, that has a lot to do with respect for the elders, respect for family values, understanding we are somehow indirect, like the Eastern communities. So we see this kind of role, which is a beautiful role for India to take a position in the world, specifically to champion the global South, because right now we are having the summit, the presidential summit in September this year in India, and then we'll be having it in Brazil, and then we'll be having it in South Africa. So I think the Indian government has the capability to set the tone and the standards for the next 3-4 years with regards to the real agendas of the global South. So we don't think of India as a country that we need to have only bilateral relationship with, but we see India as a big country that would have a global role in bettering the lives of all the communities around the world. And with regards to the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, I've seen the comments made by Minister Sergei Lavrov. I'm actually not in favor at all, just like so many nations with regards to the invasion. Nobody can actually stand and say, I'm pro-invasion, because that goes against all the UN charts, etc. But at the same time, we understand that there has been a lot of provocations from the Western nations, specifically from the United States, with regards to the expansion of NATO, etc. So that made us to be in a position where we would love to be equalizers. We do not want to escalate. The idea of escalate to de-escalate proven to not work, because all what we are seeing right now is the gloves are off. Everyone is fighting each other without having any kind of talk about having a peace plan. And so, yeah, and what we see is escalate to escalate. And it's not going to be in the interest of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia or the Arab states, or it's not going to be in the interest of India to take a stand and to be taking a side where they actually will exacerbate the issue rather than finding a solution for it.
Well, you mentioned something interesting, and I'll take cue from that. You mentioned India as an equalizer, and Saudi perhaps also playing a similar role. Prime Minister Modi, from the very beginning of this Russia-Ukraine war, has been stating that there need to be talks, there need to be peaceful negotiations, and diplomacy needs to be active instead of war on ground. And he said something interesting at the Bali summit. He said, this is not an era of war, a phrase that has been used several times since.
Absolutely.
How do you see India's neutrality? How do you see India's position since the very beginning of this war? Perhaps a very pragmatic one, but also a very risky one when most of the nations are choosing one bloc over the other.
Yeah, with regards to the taking sides, there is a difference between, for example, voting at the UN against a specific action. That has been proven that most of the nations around the world, including India and Saudi Arabia, have been against that invasion. But at the same time, we understand not the justification for that, because such war is not justifiable. But at the same time, we understand the Russian position because it has been provoked so many times. And there is actually a saying, if you are sleeping on the same bed with an elephant, you have to be worried when he will wake up or change turn. So for Ukraine, it's actually has been advised by even the European governments, like if we remember Sarkozy from France, the former president of France, and also Chancellor Merkel. They were all against the US provocations against Russia in Ukraine. And they've been all warning to not even have this hyperbolic statements with regards to Ukraine joining NATO. Okay? And they were all against the idea of having it to join EU until they resolve a lot of issues with the Russians, because they know the sensitivity of this matter. They know that it's somehow a red line for the Russians. I'm not here, I'm repeating myself, I'm not here to justify what the Russians have done. It's a mistake. I don't think it's even a calculated mistake, because they could have gotten what they wanted at the time when they threatened the invasion by having their forces on the borders, and nobody expected, or a lot of analysts didn't expect them to actually take that bold move. But since they did it, it was a big mistake. But at the same time, are we there as India or as Saudi Arabia to go and escalate, it's going to be at the interest of whom? It's going to be for the interest of nobody, because the more escalation, the worse the scenario will unfold. And at the same time, we remember, like, for example, we are from the Middle East, and we know that most of the issues that we've been facing for the last 3 decades have been in the Middle East. And we've seen, like, when there is any problem in the Middle East, all what we hear is, let's have peace plans from the West. Let's have negotiations. Let's resolve things, with peaceful means. But once this problem started in Ukraine with Russia, we don't hear that anymore. We don't hear about having a peace dialogue. Why? Because everyone is, like, as I said, the gloves are off and everyone wants to actually weaken the other in such a manner that can actually lead us to a catastrophic disaster, not only for these countries or in Europe, but for all humanity. When we have seen how the Russians have actually stepped out of the nuclear treaty, that is a very alarming thing. Even the US was actually downgrading the importance of it, but it is very alarming. Why? Because these are signals that if the Russians are going to lose, or they're not going to get to achieve what they want, that means they are actually going to go and use nuclear weapons. Is that what we want? At that time, it's going to be too late. So the best position that can anyone take right now, specifically from the global south, specifically like from India and Saudi Arabia, is to be an equalizer, to find a way through which we can get the conflicting parties to have a real negotiation with a lot of compromises, painful compromises. This is how it is. This is the world of politics. This is the world of realism. We're not here about idealism. We are here about saving the people lives, because it's not the time to save face. It's the time to save lives.
Well, India and Saudi Arabia share a very strategic and robust partnership. King Salman and, of course, Prime Minister Modi have a very good and brotherly ties as well. Particularly on the trade front, India and Saudi have been doing well, and the relationship has been going from strength to strength. How do you see this relationship building forward? And also politically and diplomatically speaking, there are countries in India's neighborhood that have tried to provoke, and particularly Saudi against India on matters like Kashmir, etc. But otherwise, how do you see this relationship developing?
Yeah, I think the Saudi-Indian relationship has never been as good as now. And it goes back to the legacy of the Arab civilization. Saudi Arabia is the birthplace of Islam, the birthplace of the Arab civilization, and India is the birthplace of the Indus Valley civilization. These countries have been having relations for 2,000 years. We are speaking of 2 millennials. We are speaking of a relationship that has been going beyond even the trade and commerce. We've been, like, for example, in Saudi Arabia, before the discovery of oil, we have had a phrase, and we until now say it. You can bet on India if life is unjust to you. So that's how the Arabs in the Arabian Peninsula, in Saudi Arabia, has been seeing India. Why? Because they see it as a land of opportunity, wealth, and promise. So do we still have the same view? Absolutely. And it has been solidified specifically in 2019 when the Crown Prince Mohammed Salman came to New Delhi and met Prime Minister Modi, and he actually called him his elder brother. Yeah. So Crown Prince Mohammed Salman called Modi as his elder brother. And from that moment, we actually could see that the leadership in both countries are actually having this kind of momentum, and they are patriotic. They love their nations and they want the best for their nations. And that's what we need. We need more realism. We need more pragmatism. We need less ideology. And that's what the kingdom is actually working on. Let's be very frank with regards to the historical aspect of the Saudi-Indian relations. It has been good throughout history, but at the same time, definitely at the time before 1991, before the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Indian-Saudi relationship was not as good for different reasons. One of them is because of Saudi Arabia being from the camp of being against Marxism or against the Soviets, etc. But once the collapse of the Soviet Union happened in 1990, in 1991, India has started to pivot to the West. And that kind of gave us like a way through which we are actually having the same kind of direction. What I'm seeing right now from both nations who have been having the same direction of pivot to the West, right now we are seeing Saudi Arabia to pivot to the East and to pivot to itself as well. So in the sense that we are actually thinking of ourselves as we need to be having a modern economy, we need to go beyond oil. We are not actually happy with the idea that we are just a oil provider to others. We need to actually provide more value, and that's what we are working on in every field. We are actually having the biggest transition in energy when it comes to the green hydrogen and the blue hydrogen, etc. And also with the solar, one of the biggest projects will be there in the northern part of Saudi Arabia, close to Neom, which is the most promising city in human history. Maybe it's like a big kind of hyperbolic statement, but it is. And at the same time, when it comes to the Indian-Saudi relationships, we also had something like some very similar challenges, combating radicalism and Islamist groups. I think Saudi Arabia, specifically with its neighbors, specifically the UAE and Egypt, have managed to change the ideological map of the Middle East by having zero tolerance with extremist elements within our societies, by being very vocal and strong in confronting the Muslim Brotherhood and Islamist movements. And I think the government of India and the Indian communities, the Muslims and all the other, would love to have the same movement, which is something that's going to help foster the relationship between the people to people, because this is one of the areas that we need to highlight. We need to have more cultural events. We need to have more people-to-people communication between India and the Arabs. And we also definitely don't forget the fact that the biggest minority in the Middle East are actually from India. In Saudi Arabia, we have more than 2 million people, and they're contributing to our economy in a massive manner, in engineering, in so many different fields. And I think the future is going to be very bright. I'm not actually very happy with the $42 billion trade volume, because the potential for these two countries is way higher than that. And I think with the current Prime Minister of India and the current Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, I think with their vision and their alignments and their visionary views of their countries, I think they will not only double this trade volume, but they might actually triple it within the next 5 to 10 years.
I also want to reflect on what you just said. You said, about countering Islamist radicalization. And India, as you know, has been a victim of terrorism for a very long time. And there's been constant radicalization, be it, ISIS more so in the south of India, or particularly in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, where, there are groups like Jaish-e-Mohammed, Lashkar-e-Toiba, and Hizbul Mujahideen. You know about the Mumbai 26/11 attack that happened, and terrorists who planned that are still active in Pakistan. How does one deal with, radicalization? What can India, learn or perhaps take a cue from Saudi? And the second part of my question is about UN reforms. Where do you stand on the UN reforms, particularly on a convention, on terrorism, where the UN has completely failed in the last many years, in fact, I would say many decades, to even define terrorism?
Good. With regards to the UN, before going ahead and speak about the programs to defeat terrorism, etc., with regards to the UN, I've heard some speeches yesterday in the Raisina dialogue with regards to reforming the Security Council, as if it was the priority. I actually don't see it to be of high importance for the time being, because at the end of the day, if we think about it realistically, sometimes it's actually somehow comforting for the other 192 nations to have two nations like Moscow or like and Washington D.C. to not be sleeping on the same bed. Why? Because the moment these two capitals agree on everything, then the other 192 nations will be vulnerable to their decisions. So sometimes having this balance, this strategic balance, should be seen with some positive light. I could be wrong, but the Security Council definitely needs to be reformed at some level, but not now. What needs to be reformed with regards to the United Nations, maybe it's something that we might differ. Why? Because right now, the United Nations, right now, I would not call it the UN, I would call it the UDN, which is the United Democratic Nations. We have no problem with the idea of democracy as a government system, but we have a problem with governments and institutions that would dictate on other systems how they should govern their people. And this is one of the beautiful aspects of India, which is the biggest democracy in the world in terms of population, but at the same time, they never lecture others on how to govern your country. Where we see some Western countries influencing the UN to be taking the idea of democracy as if it's the one and only system. One size fits all. That doesn't work. Logically, it doesn't work. And it actually goes against the spirit of democracy. The spirit of democracy is appreciating diversity. Why appreciating diversity in everything except for the political system? Maybe you think it's the best system. It could be. If for you, for this nation, for that nation, but not necessarily for everybody. So that's actually one of the things that need to be redefined with regards to the United Nations, because we want the United Nations to be in a position where they are equalizers, where they are seeing every nation with a clear view, without actually having these ideologies to be embedded there. We respect every government, every structure, but at the same time, we want the other governments to do the same with regards to our systems. And sometimes, like I remember, I have been asked with regards to a democracy, like, is there like, do you think there will be any kind of democratic move within the GCC, whatever? And I was actually like asking, like, what kind of democracy? Is it like the one in Lebanon, or is it the one in Iraq? We don't want these democracies if it's gonna actually, or the one in Afghanistan that has been imposed by the Americans before. We don't want that. Why? Because it's not going to go along with our cultural narratives. It doesn't go along with our understanding of governance. That's number one. With regards to extremism, absolutely, Saudi Arabia has been taking a large role in that. And Saudi Arabia, throughout the last 7 years, they have been, the government has made Riyadh to be the epicenter and capital of the global efforts to combat terrorism. They initiated the Islamic Alliance Against Terrorism, the military alliance, and also the IWC, Ideological Warfare Center, and also I'tidal, which is the global center for combating terrorism electronically, etc. And they've been doing a massive work with that regard. Zero tolerance with terrorism is the Saudi policy, and we ask everyone to do the same. With regards to our relationship with Pakistan and India, there's no doubt that the Saudi-Pakistani relationship is strong, and it will remain to be strong. And that's going to be at the interest of our relationship with India, and it's going to be at the interest for the Pakistanis. And I've been telling some journalists from Pakistan that our relationship with India is for the benefits of all. India is a great nation, and we share a lot with them, just like Pakistan is a great nation, and we share a lot with them. Do we differ in this and that? Every country differ with so many different countries, and nobody can actually, even like brothers and siblings actually have differences in opinions. So that's actually fine. So I think the Saudis can actually play a crucial role in creating this kind of a balanced view, and to de-escalate a lot of the tensions that have been there between the two nations. And it's the same goes with like the Indian relationship with Iran. Is that something that we like? Not necessarily, but at the same time, we understand the Indian position with regards to opening up and having equal relations with everybody, and to not taking sides in every field. So, and I think the Indian government also respects the fact that we have relations with its neighbors. But going back to terrorism, zero tolerance with terrorism, it's the real policy of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And not only Saudi Arabia, but they have actually been working with all the Muslim nations, 57 nations, to find a real solution, because you cannot fight terrorism only by force. It should be going through the 3 M's, as the Mr. Adil Jubair has explained it: the men, mind, and money. The men is like to go by force and to combat terrorists, the actual men who are actually carrying terrorist attacks, and also to follow the money, because you have to fight like they call it CTF, combating terror financing, etc. And also to drain definitely the swamp for them, etc. And also the mindset. And the mindset is actually the most crucial one, and no one can actually play a crucial role on that other than Saudi Arabia, because it's the birthplace of Islam, and it's the one that will tell the whole world what Islam is all about. It has nothing to do with terrorism, and it should never be tied to terrorism. And all the Islamist movements and ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the Muslim Brotherhood should be fought decisively, and we do not want to be lectured from the East or the West on how to fight these terrorists, because right now, unfortunately, we are seeing some countries in the West that are actually telling us that we are being very decisive and very harsh on some of the elements of our community, and we will be telling them, yes, we are, and we will keep doing so. Why?
Right.
Because we don't want to live in the era of having women to not have their rights because of these zealous and these fanatical elements within our community. It's the time to drain the swamp, and that's the policy of the kingdom.
Salman Ansari, thank you so much for joining
Shukriya.
us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.